everyone, and welcome to Book Review of the Vampire, the show in which Leonora and I are reading progressively the Vampire Chronicles series from Anne Rice, currently on the Vampire Lestat. Good evening, Leonora.
Hello. Hello, everyone.
How very creepy and mysterious of you. Thank you. Can you give me your best vampire good evening?
Oh, God, no.
Oh, you're no fun. But speaking of people who are fun, random American, Dafuk Ashel. See? Noah Asensio Bishop Keeverdam. And I think that's everybody I see right now. So for those of you that might be lurking or in the future, good evening. And also, if you'll turn your attention to the top of the chat box at some point, there's links to the fundraisers for our friends Joshua, Maddie, and Lisa. And Joshua was in need of some financial help after some things befell him as far as bills and things. Maddie needs some help with some deductibles for cancer treatment, so please take a look at that one. And lastly, Lisa and her boyfriend need some help paying for their puppy's medical bills. So if you can donate, please do. If you can't, it'd be appreciated if you could share those out on social media. Thank you so much in advance. Lurking Gopher, good evening. Yeah, so tonight we have completed part 4, The Children of Darkness.
The
darkness. And oh boy, a whole bunch of concepts and ideas and things in this chapter. I wasn't quite aware, I should say, just how much the creator of Vampire the Masquerade, Mark Reinhagen, completely stole from the Anne Rice books, because there are things in there are things in this section that I'm just like, I wonder if he was ever sued for intellectual quote unquote plagiarism or anything. But man, there's so much stuff in this. I'm like, even the phrase World of Darkness, which was the name of the game line that the entire series was based around, appears as a phrase in this chapter.
Mm-hmm.
It's quite interesting. I think the origins of the Malkavians are in here, the Sabbat, a whole bunch of other things. But we'll talk about that as we go, or at least I will, because I'm the nerd about Vampire the Masquerade.
Yeah, I am totally ignorant about it.
It's fine. It's fine. And nobody's perfect. So as we ended the last chapter,
yes,
that's not Maiko by the way, or that chapter, I should say. Lestat and Gabrielle had been confronted by a youthful vampire who really thought he knew his stuff outside of the Notre Dame Cathedral. And Lestat was effectively defeated in front of the collection of the Coven, I suppose we'll call them. And they were both, Gabrielle and Lestat, taken to the secret underground lair at the La Innocence cemetery, where they were confronted by Armand and his gaggle of very superstitious and ancient vampires. So, and we have a very, okay, I realize we're reading a book about vampires, and so things aren't exactly realistic. But if we're supposed to believe the setting, you mean to tell me that this coven of vampires who have been around in Paris for at least a couple hundred years or something, right?
Yes.
Nobody at any time even got curious or questioned the quote-unquote rules that Armand told them about who they served and whether or not they could go into a church, and they just accepted everything without question. And Lestat comes in, and within about 10 minutes, the entire thing falls apart because he asks 3 questions.
Well, it's like a cult, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, to just accept and follow, I guess.
I just... that was the one part of this that, I mean, it didn't ruin the whole thing for me, but I just kept sitting there going like, wait a second. I understand. I've read up a little bit on cults from time to time, so I understand the kind of mindset of go along to get along and so on. But the idea that nobody in that entire group, not even the laughing queen, whatever her name was, nobody ever questioned the rules. Nobody ever questioned, like, oh, you can't go into a church and crosses will hurt you, and we can't move amongst mortals, and we have to do it this way and that way and everything else. That was the one part that just kind of made me go, okay, I don't believe it, but all right, we'll move on. But anyway, Lestat puts doubt into this coven of raggedy vampires.
Yep.
And within one conversation, everything falls apart. But let's get into the details of it. So Lestat and Gabrielle are whisked away from Notre Dame down to the secret headquarters of the coven. And they're that is also stinky, yes, because it's down in the cemetery with all the bodies and all the yucky and everything. And in the middle of this dome headquarters or whatever is Nicholas. Nicholas has been captured. He's being held prisoner. And did I just hear a beep or something?
That's Stella. I'm sorry.
Oh, Stella made a beeping sound?
Well, she's meowing.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Stella is one of the various kitty cats that Leonora... Vampire cats.
Yes,
Vampire
of course.
cats.
All of them.
Yeah, it's like Banicula, but cat version. So Nicholas is there, and he's being held hostage, and Lestat and Gabrielle are there, and suddenly there's this philosophical debate between Lestat and the coven, and then, of course, when Armand shows up. Now, I was trying to remember... I don't think in Interview with the Vampire, Armand is described as effectively a child. Am I misremembering that? Because in the book, I kind of envisioned him as at least a semi-adult. In this one, he's effectively like, I don't want to, maybe in his early to mid-teens, something like that is how he's described.
Yes.
Okay, so things have... Yeah, again, we can't take the events of Interview with the Vampire as lockstep canon anymore.
Exactly.
Things keep changing, and Louis' tale or the in the interpreted tale of the writer is all off. But anyway, so Armand shows up all, short, dark, and silent, and Lestat has these sort of philosophical conversations with the coven bit by bit, especially the old queen he calls Armand's, I guess, girlfriend or partner in crime. She's a slightly older in appearance vampire who is also laughing and crazy and everything else. And I have to assume that she was at least an inspiration, if not the model, for Clan Malkavian in the Vampire the Masquerade game, who are all crazy in one way, shape, or form. But we learn a few things about how these vampires operated, unlike Lestat. So these vampires are all very superstitious about the world. They're very superstitious about religion in particular. They are told and believe that they are effectively children of Satan.
Yeah, they're fearful of God.
Fearful of God, so they stay out of churches. They get turned off by crosses or are told that they will be harmed by them. They live as monsters and ghouls away from people and everything. And also, there is a what would be called in the Vampire the Masquerade game a creation ritual. When they are turned into a vampire, they are buried, and they are left there to basically starve and claw their way out of the grave. And if they survive, they join the coven. If they don't, they just lay down there forever, sort of in a torpor, thirsty and everything. Yeah. So as far as how that works in the Vampire the Masquerade game, this effectively destroys your sense of humanity because you have no illusions now that you are a dead thing. The hunger that overtakes you breaks your brain in a way and makes you see the world in a completely, and yourself in a completely different way. And the vampires in this coven effectively believe that you have to do that. You have to break your ties with humanity and a sense of love or sentimentality or anything, or else you will go insane because of immortality and loneliness and everything else. That your ability to attach yourself to living things will eventually destroy you. So you have to entirely think of yourself as something else and detach yourself from humanity. And that's what the whole burial ritual is meant to do.
And that's one of the reasons that actually that they are so upset with Lestat and Gabrielle, like because they did not uh like do the ritual as it is stated,
Yeah, they move amongst people. They, interact with humans as they would in regular humans. They dress as humans dress and do all types of things. You're not supposed to do that. You're supposed to live separate. You're supposed to live in the shadows. You're not supposed to interact or mingle. You're supposed to be out here being the creatures and the monsters and the children of the devil that you're supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so they are blasphemers and heretics, effectively.
Yes.
The problem for them, though, is that Lestat standing there is like, I'm not being struck by lightning.
Yeah.
I'm not having God come down and smite me. I can walk into a church. I didn't do anything special. I was made by one of your own who then killed himself, Magnus. So I'm functionally, mechanically no different than you are, and yet here I am.
Yeah,
and this immediately. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry, and also one of the problems, quote unquote, let's say, is that he was created by Magnus, and he was the only one that was created by Magnus, and that made him like with super strength, apparently.
Yeah, Magnus is more or less said to be an elder within this group, and so I don't know that he was older than Armand, but he was at least somewhere probably as old as Armand or close to.
Yes.
I don't know if it says explicitly. He may have even been someone that Armand made into a vampire. But either way, Magnus was a very, very old vampire, and the seeming mechanics of the vampires in Anne Rice, Vampire Chronicles, I'm not sure yet, and maybe it's been mentioned elsewhere, but someone could correct me, is that the older you become, the more powerful you become. It has nothing to do necessarily with who made you so long as how long you've been a vampire. And Magnus is apparently a very, very old vampire. And so consequently, he passed this, a shade of his own elder power on to Lestat, and Lestat then gave similarly to Gabrielle. I assume there's lots of mechanics in the Vampire the Masquerade game that explain how this worked, but I'm not quite sure how it's supposed to work in the Vampire Chronicles. Maybe it'll be explained more explicitly later. But either way, Lestat is at least as powerful as Armand, because both he and Gabrielle were able to resist his, manipulations in the church, whereas anybody else would have been immediately bowled over. So, so Lestat challenges this coven with the earth is actually round kind of conversation. And within a few pages, Armand's like, the gig is up. It's like the whole thing's ruined. You've ruined it all, which says that Armand also knew the truth, and so he was just taking advantage of everybody's ignorance all this time.
Of course, and that is terrible.
Yeah, well, vampires. But the thing that this is where it gets kind of goofy to me. This is the part that I don't get. Maybe you have an idea on this. The whole I am a new kind of evil argument. Like he's trying to explain to these guys that their way of doing things is old and the Dark Ages and everything else. And my moving through mortals and not existing as a shadow or something, I am a new kind of evil. And I'm like, okay, you've been a vampire for 6 months. We learned that at this point, that Lestat up to this point has been a vampire for 6 months. In 6 months' time, Lestat has gone from being a sort of the man of the house, despite the fact that he's not the oldest son. He's been a hero to his family in the town. He has made a best friend. He has escaped off to Paris to live a life of the arts and beauty and everything else. And he's been a vampire for 6 months. And now he's like, I am evil. And I'm like, dude, shut up. What are you talking about? It just doesn't make any sense to me that within half a year of having been killed and turned into a monster, that all of a sudden now you're the great philosopher on morality or embodying some element of nature or something. It just, I mean, I get it. It just doesn't track. Or is that just me?
Uh, well, I think that well, what we know about him is that he always has been like the person, like in his family, or in like in Paris, or now a vampire. He's always the person that has to uh like to solve things, like to uh bring everything to the table, and to help the family and help the town and help everyone, because he's surrounded by idiots. It's 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 the truth. So I don't blame him for feeling that he is like like the new thing, the vampire thing, because like he has been like that all his life, whether he wanted it or not. But it's the reality. So uh, I don't think that he's 100% mistaken of thinking that way. And also, he needed to have like a like some of a valid argument about why should this vampire thing should evolve. And I also think he's not wrong. Like, what future do they have, like just being like hidden from everything, and with all living in that stinky place, when they are like the most powerful things on earth at the moment. So yeah.
Yeah, no, he's not wrong in that sense, because just on sort of the realities of the world, we're not talking about the Dark Ages where you had tiny little communities that were separated by miles. And if
Mm-hmm.
anybody was found out to be, an unknown or a stranger or something, you're immediately become a monster, a pariah, or maybe you're a witch or something. So yeah, as
Yeah.
population counts grow, and it just makes more sense. You're going to have to adapt. So that part is true. The thing I don't buy is that none of this ever occurred to 300-year-old introspective, can read any book in about 10 minutes. We find that out later, Armand. And that suddenly Armand is completely sideswiped by
Mm-hmm.
one guy that shows up on this one night, and he destroys the entire coven. Whereas Armand, who, it's not like he didn't have access to books or other things, or couldn't have this entire time, or any curiosity otherwise, never thought it might be a good idea to gradually transition his coven into a modern sort of group. It just seems too convenient that Lestat shows up and suddenly everything falls apart and Armand is completely taken off guard. It just doesn't, that part doesn't track. For as smart as Armand is supposed to be in this, only now it occurs to him to read a book, as we see him do later on when he's going to Nicholas's place and reading through his library and everything. It's just,
Yeah.
anyway. Okay, well, back to the event. So yeah, so Lestat and Gabrielle are down in this dome underneath the cemetery and confronted by the coven. And the coven is made up of about, I randomly guessed last week, I think about a dozen vampires, and it really is about a dozen. Led by Armand, a very, very
Mm-hmm.
old but very young-looking individual. There's the old queen, as she's called. I don't think she's ever given a name, who is this
No.
cackling, insane, sort of mad truth-sayer. And then you have all these other, surrounding vampires, some of whom we learn their names later, but they're at the moment relatively inconsequential. Anyway, so they've captured Nicholas. They're trying to punish Lestat and Gabrielle for being blasphemers and heathens and affronts to their place in the world, and God will smite them, and this, that, and the other. Except Lestat's like, nah, nothing's happening. And you guys don't have to live this way. Look at what we did. We went into the church. Nothing happened. We can put a cross on our heads. Nothing happens. You're being lied to, or your leader is misleading you, or things are not as they used to be. They have to be different. If you're going to operate in this world, you're going to have to change. And of course, these creatures have been conditioned to believe that there is no changing. This is what they are. And there can't be anything different. And Armand immediately knows that he's been defeated by the most mild of arguments conjured up by Lestat on the spot. The 6-month-old vampire has totally blown away any idea that these guys can exist or should exist the way that they have been. And yeah, I mean, that takes a while. I'm summarizing it quite a bit there. But yeah, we learn about their, for lack of a better phrase, their creation rites in this coven. Like when you make a new vampire, you bury them and let them starve themselves until they claw their way out of the grave. That's supposed to separate them from their sentimentality, their sense of humanity, to prepare them for their role as a child of Satan and everything.
Yeah, and also I think like before that they had to like prove to have like 100 deaths or something. So they have to be like terrible people before becoming like, you know, like terrible vampires.
Yeah, they'll only turn vampires out of criminals and, you know, crappy people to begin with. They have to already be effectively servants of the devil in life before they become
but how do you think that happens? Like they just and how does it happen if they, you know, like barely go out just to feed? So they just like look someone and go like, okay, do you want to become a vampire? Well, we need like 100 confirmed deaths.
No. So what I imagine they would do, and this is again from information that I have from the Vampire the Masquerade game. So the vampires are immortal. If throughout the course of their, you know, running around the city, you're just going around, they can, and of course some of them can read minds. So if they read the mind or witness somebody do something terrible, they just start following them and just keep tabs on them for months or weeks or years or however long it takes to see if this person is going to be a reasonable recruit, because they've got all the time in the world. So they might as well just wait and see. So they just follow this person, see what they do, read their mind, read their thoughts, their memories, you know, sort of assess them as a candidate to join the coven. And then, bam, there's no interview process. They probably just grab them in the night and do it because they already know they're of low character. So that's more likely than not what they do. There's a clan in the Vampire the Masquerade game called the La Sombra. What they do is they, if they find somebody they think might be a good candidate, they both follow this person's life, but also manipulate events around them to test them before they think that they're worthy enough. And a couple of clans do that. The La Sombra do that. The Setites also do that. They don't think they're actually vampires, though. They think that they're children of the Egyptian god Set. That's a whole other thing. But they very well may be. But yeah, so that's one of the things that vampires have the ability to do, is to sort of watch, study, guide, or manipulate events to put to the test a potential future vampire. So I imagine that's what they were talking about when they try to find somebody who's committed all these crimes and things, or whatever they consider to be sins. You know, have you committed 100 sins or whatever, and that kind of stuff. So yeah, Nicholas is being held as bait and also as punishment for these two blasphemers, except that Lestat is able to talk them out of it. And Armand effectively admits defeat. And then all the other vampires are disillusioned, and they're all like, our coven doesn't mean anything. We don't know what to do. And Armand knows that the gig is up. And Lestat and Gabrielle are like, okay, well, we'll just go now. And they just kind of zip, we're out of here.
Yeah.
while you're all in disarray, you know, with this revelation that you guys are living a lie, we're going to go over here. And so Lestat and Gabrielle take Nicholas back to the tower, Magnus's tower. Yeah. They lock Nicholas in a room with food and wine and everything, because he's been fed on. He's been fed on by the other vampires, so he's very weak. And even though Gabrielle and Lestat can't read each other's minds anymore, Gabrielle knows what Lestat is thinking, and she's like, "Don't do it." Lestat's like, he's going to make Make Nicholas make Nicholas into a vampire. Like, don't do it. You know, you got this friend, you got the guy who's kind of like your bromate. You know, your platonic romance. So Lestat, he does it. He brings Nicholas over into vampiredom, and Nicholas doesn't take it well. He is an empty vessel at that point. He is turned into a vampire, but is effectively an automaton.
But do you think he shouldn't, like, he shouldn't have done that? Like, I think his argument, like, like, apart from I want my buddy, uh the part that he knows, like, everything
Mm-hmm.
because he was there, uh and I think the other choice was just kill him, you know.
Yeah, I mean and this is the ethical problem that shows up in a lot of stories that I've either been a part of or written for playing the game is that yeah, once somebody knows the truth, they conceivably become a target of your enemies because they're
Mm-hmm.
mortal and much more vulnerable. If you send Nicholas off to Italy or whatever and try to like make him, have another life or something, he's vulnerable. And is he going to enjoy life knowing the truth about what's out there? Is he going to be looking over his shoulder the rest of his life? So yeah, it is a weird moral situation to be in. Like, do I try to have him pretend like nothing ever happened and just put him away from this, even though he's probably going to be curious as heck as to what happened, and he's going to know what to look for and also become a target. Somebody could hold him against me in the future because if I have this sentiment for him, all one of my enemies would have to do is just capture him again and put him under threat. Or do I just kill him and put him out of everybody's misery? Like, but Lestat, he turns Nikki into a vampire,
Mm-hmm.
and by doing so, effectively, Nicholas is soulless. He's now just a dead thing, and he just kind of goes along. He doesn't really say anything. There's no literal and figurative life or passion left in him, and he just kind of wanders around. And he attaches himself more to Gabrielle because, unlike Lestat, Gabrielle and him and Nicholas can exchange thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
There's no psychic barrier between them as Lestat is to Gabrielle and Nicholas. So apparently, the punishment for making somebody else a vampire is you can't read their mind anymore, I guess, is this particular mechanic in the thing. So anyway, Lestat's like, okay, well, I'll fix Nicholas. He just needs his violin.
Of course.
That will fix him, and he'll be happy again, and we can be happy as our own little coven of three. And so Lestat goes on a little journey to try to find the violin. And it's the first place he thinks of, well, maybe it's back at Nicholas's apartment that I bought for him with all of my riches before. And so he goes back there, and who's there reading all of Nicholas's books? Armand. And apparently Armand can read a book in like 5 minutes. He goes through Julius Caesar's Gallic Wars, and like he just sits there and is just flipping through the pages, and Lestat is like looking around the apartment, and then suddenly he realizes somebody else is there. He looks in the room. Armand has his back to him, and Lestat's like, okay, I'm just gonna back up now and kind of go away. But of course Armand confronts him, and Lestat's like, hey dude, this is how it is. I don't you do you. I'm sorry about your people, but that's not my problem. And as we're going along, and I'm thinking back to Interview with the Vampire, I'm just like, okay, so Lestat was way more involved in the whole Armand thing than we're kind of led to believe in Interview with the Vampire. Like they knew of each other, but they didn't have any kind of close relationship kind of thing. And Lestat felt like, in the Interview with the Vampire, I felt like he was an intruder, even though technically he knew all of these people, except he didn't. We'll get to that momentarily, but it's just, it's kind of confusing trying to hold these two images of these characters together when you have it contradicted so much.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually Lestat's like, maybe it's at the theater that I closed down, that I bought, that we used to perform at. So he goes there, and he's tracked down by 3 of the ghoulies. And they say, Armand threw everybody else into fire and killed them. Mm-hmm. And we're the only ones that escaped. Except for the mad queen lady who threw herself in the fire because she was crazy. And Lestat's like, well, that sucks to be you. And they're like, you need to teach us. We'll join your coven. We'll be part of your group now. Lestat's like, I
don't have one. I don't need one.
Yeah, I'm not taking on some strays. Well, what are we going to do? And he's just like, believe in yourselves. He does like this vampire life coach thing right there in the alley. He's just like, you guys could be performers. You know, you can do stuff and things and stuff. I mean, I screwed up at that theater by showing off all my vampire stuff. But, you know, if you tone it down a bit, you could be all goofy and weird on a street corner. No one's going to know otherwise. Hey, there's a whole bunch of stuff in this theater. Hey, how about you guys just have the theater? Tell you what, you just have the theater. That way I don't have to be your daddy or anything. You guys have the theater. It's fun. Mm-hmm. You do that. And they're like, oh, really? Wow. Okay. Do you think we could do that? And the one little kid vampire is kind of like, I don't know. This doesn't make any sense. And it's like, okay, you're supposed to look like a teenager, not act like one. You guys are like ancient, right? But anyway, they're given the most, I mean, Lestat's been a vampire for 6 months. These guys have been vampires for, who knows, hundreds of years or something at this point, and led by Armand, who himself is like a several centuries old individual. And the 6-month-old newbie vampire who's I mean, this is the part that just doesn't, like, none of them ever had any curiosity. None of them ever questioned the reality of the situation or just observed people over the course of this amount of time and thought to themselves, maybe we should try something different. Nothing. That's the part I kept running into.
Well, apparently not. And the thing is that what I see is that the only one that was like willing to start questioning, or that wanted to, you know, to look beyond their beliefs, was Magnus, and that's why he was an outcast in the end.
Yeah.
So
I guess so. Yeah.
You know, like, that's the only thing that they knew, and I am not like, I could believe that they didn't, you know anything better.
See, I'd buy that except for the character of the Mad Queen, because she mocked everything. She was the court jester. She was half oracle. She kept like,
she knew everything.
Yeah, she was being contrarian the whole time. And so the idea that her in that group, for the amount of time they must have been there, and her behaving in that way, that nobody ever had a doubt, or, like I say, it seemed like the coven and the situation, even though it's supposed to have been in existence for hundreds of years at this point, for the sake of the story, just appeared fully formed without any backstory to it, and was just this way. And that's, anyway, I won't dwell on that.
I'm gonna tell you just one thing.
Mm-hmm.
You like these cult things, right? Like, reading about them is part of your hobby.
Yeah, I've read a thing or two about cults in the past. It's true.
Okay, so you can't believe this, and you can believe like cult stories that y'all all read, like, you know?
Yeah, except that every cult story ends up having somebody who steps out of line and causes everything to question, and at least some of the members. And so the idea that this group has persisted for hundreds of some odd years, and there's never been enough of a schism to make anybody doubt even a smidge in the direction of what Lestat was able to argue to them in like 10 minutes. Admittedly, we don't know the entire history of this coven. We don't know what other things have happened. They don't really allude to any of that. But at the same time, I just thought, I guess, like I said, you have to kind of like shrug your shoulders and kind of move on just a little bit. It's for the sake of the story, but all the same, it just felt like everything collapsed in on itself way too quickly, especially when you're living in all places for this coven to have existed for this time. Paris, one of the centers of modernity and science and development and civilization. If this was happening off in the boonies of Transylvania again, like if we were in the Carpathians and Lestat came across these guys, that would make sense. I wouldn't have a problem with that, because you've got a land and a population that thrives on suspicion, that thrives on superstition. The idea that this coven, with everything that's going on around them, from the arts to sciences to culture to politics, that everything is just ignored, and they can somehow maintain this bubble of ancient superstition without questioning anything. That's what made it difficult. It really was the setting and the belief system. you could keep that lie up for a long time, I'm sure, among superstitious vampires, but just you can't just move through Paris and not say, wait a second. That's especially at that time period. It just didn't make a lot. That part didn't make a lot of sense to me.
Okay.
Anyway, so Lestat goes into the theater. He finds the magical violin, but he doesn't have to go far because apparently Nicholas is already there.
Yes.
Because Gabrielle brought him there or whatever else, because Gabrielle can know where he's going and she had an idea. And so Lestat hands him his... Well, at first he takes the Stradivarius and he adjusts it and makes it all fine and everything. And then he hands this object of power to Nicholas. And suddenly Nicholas he's back to himself. He starts playing amazingly with his vampire powers, and he's just... The whole place is empty. He starts playing, and it's an amazing song. And it's all described very in detail in images and emotions and everything. And I guess some days had passed between Lestat finding the guys outside the theater and him finding the violin. I forget. Maybe I think I'm missing something. Did I skip over an event or two? Because they had already become performers by the time that Nicholas gets his violin.
Well, yeah, it's not the... No, you're right. That doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, because the trio of vampires who'd survived the coven had decided to take it upon themselves to become performers. So they go into the theater and they take advantage of the costuming and the makeup and everything else. And
yeah, because it's right after he tells them, like, yeah, you can be like street performers.
Yeah, how are you going to survive amongst mortals? You can do supernatural things. Nobody's going to question it. You just have to go on a street corner and like play dress up and act the fool, and nobody will know the difference. But anyway, so yeah, I think I must be missing some step in between that meeting in the alley with the three vampires and Lestat deciding to go and find the violin.
Isn't that then he goes to Roger to ask about his father and to tell him that he needs to like reopen the theater for those guys, or not? I'm just confused.
I think he did it after that. Oh my god!
Because he goes then another time. That's when Nikki wants to...
Well, Nikki goes to the lawyer and tries to overtake Lestat's ownership of the theater and call back. That's after the violin thing. So anyway, might be getting my events mixed up slightly, but either way, the violin thing happens. Nicholas just like comes back to himself, but at the same time, he also mentally breaks in the process because he realizes like, this is all I have to look forward to now. I'm dead. I can do all this stuff, but there's no joy in it. The other three vampires dance around him, but he gets inspired. He's like, we'll make a theater of vampires. A theater of vampires. He gets all excited, and then we see the origin of the theater of vampires from Interview with the Vampire, but except that instead of Armand running it, now it's Nicholas. Unless that happens later in the chronology of things. And he tries to overtake Lestat's control of the theater, and he tries to call back the performers from the old theater from London because he's effectively going to try to make them all into vampires. But the lawyer is like, I don't work with you. I work with Mr. Lestat. And Lestat shows up and finds all this out. And he says, so don't do that. He's crazy. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Ignore him. Do what I say. And then eventually Lestat finds the one reasonable vampire amongst the survivors of the coven.
Yes, Eleni.
I think her name, Eleni, yes. And he says, so you're in charge now. Keep Nicholas in line and be the reasonable one and everything else. And this is fine. And so this is, and that's all kind of wrapped up very quickly at the end of the section. Like within a page and a half or something, everything about that is summarized. which I found kind of odd given how relatively extensive in detail everything else was. We get about 4 or 5 brief paragraphs separated by paragraph breaks, kind of just telling us, like one paragraph is, and it was to Eleni finally that I gave control of the theater of the vampires and the income to pass through Roget, which would allow her to do with it what she pleased. And that's the end of the deal. It was like, okay. And before I left her that night, I asked her what she knew of Armand. Gabrielle was with us. We were in the alleyway again, near the stage door. He watches, Eleni answered. Sometimes he lets himself be seen. Her face was very confusing to me, sorrowful. Quote, but God only knows what he will do, she added fearfully, when he discovers what is really going on here. And dun, dun, dun. Dun, dun, dun. And at this point, with Nicholas kind of like a guy that Lestat can no longer be a part of the life of, and Nicholas hating Lestat for what he's done to him and the position he's put him in, they kind of have to break up. But Lestat also knows that Armand might be the only one that can guide them throughout this immortality. So now we're kind of back to where Louis was in Interview with the Vampire.
Yes.
Where Louis like, I can't exist being father to this Claudia child anymore. There's another vampire that might be able to be my companion. And, oh, Armand, you will be the one. And so it's a very weird... So, I mean, when you combine the events of the first book and this book, it all feels so... And maybe this was intentional because it's Anne Rice. It all feels so very incestuous. Like everybody's having to get a crush on everybody else's extra boyfriend, you know?
Totally.
Time.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, we learn a lot more about the lore of these vampires and how they're driven by more superstition than anything else. We confirm that, you know, churches don't cause them to burst into flames, neither do crosses. But we also learn about the rituals of this particular coven to separate themselves from humanity. And I remember then here when they're talking about that, the old queen, the crazy lady, the Malkavian, she basically warns Lestat, it's like, yeah, well, if you get attached to humanity, you're going to go nuts, more nuts than I am, because you'll see these people die, you'll feel a part of them, and you'll watch everything wither around you, and you'll go crazier than we do. So effectively, by separating themselves from their sentimentality over humankind and humanity and everything else, they're saving themselves from madness. At least that's their theory.
Yeah, but Lestat said, too late.
Well, not only too late, but it's also no way to live. Like to live that way would be absolute hell on earth. And you can kind of see both sides of the argument. Like if you believe yourself to be a monster and you exist as a monster, then you know exactly what you are and you never feel like you've lost something. You simply are this function in reality. And especially if you think it is divine dictate that you are and behave as you are. On the other side, it's like, well, to live that way would be absolutely, you know, unbearable, torturous. If you're going to live forever, you have to find something to tie yourself to something beyond yourself. And so why not humanity and everything else? And this is one of the key philosophical differences between the factions in the Vampire the Masquerade game, between the Camarilla, which are the sort of humanistic-ish vampires, and the Sabbat, which are the weird blood-sucking monster vampires. And reading this section and seeing their rationale and their philosophy and their rituals, yeah, it's a complete lift from this book into the lore of Vampire the Masquerade. So I was very, very familiar with all of it and the arguments thereof. But it's most especially the fact that the phrase world of darkness appears in this chapter. I thought, okay, they named their whole product line after that. So yeah, the Mark Reinhagen and White Wolf Publishing that made the game. This particular chapter was very meaningful to me in establishing the lore of several different things in that game. But anyway, so yeah, at the end of this section, we are told, beware Armand. You don't know what he's going to do. And the next section is called The Vampire Armand, which I think is the title of one of the later books in the series, if I'm not mistaken. So if I'm not, is that so? Is The Vampire Armand one of the books?
I don't know. Do you want me
I
to
thought
look?
so. Yeah, I thought. Hold on a second. Yes, the novel Vampire Armand. It's the which book in the series is it? Oh, that's telling me about the character. No, I'm talking about the book. Let's see. Author of Merrick. Oh, come on. Where in the order of things is this book? And the latest installment. They don't say, or it doesn't say on here. Anyway, somewhere in the series, oh, sorry, book 6. There it is. The 6th book in the series is called The Vampire Armand. And the section of this book is called The Vampire Armand. So I'm assuming we'll get a capsule history of this character, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I suppose we'll find out. But anyway, those are the events. Lots of stuff we learned as far as lore and the psychology of vampires in this.
Yeah.
And also, again, had confirmed to us that there's nothing holy binding these vampires. Churches, crosses, prayers, holy water, and everything else. It's all, if it does anything to you, it's effectively psychosomatic.
Yep.
So any other thoughts before we wrap things up?
Yes, I have a couple.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, first one. Do you think that Crazy Queen Vampire Lady is our main character in the Queen of the Dam or not?
I would be surprised. The Queen of the Damned, I think, is supposed to be Akasha, like the mother of all vampires, as referred to. So I don't think so. But I mean, then again, my reference for some of this stuff now is movies that don't really line up with the book. So maybe we'll see her in a flashback or something. Don't know.
Okay. The other part is how the interview with a vampire, like the book, is completely different from the movie in this particular part of the vampire theater, and the relationship between Armand and Lestat, because in the movie we don't see any interaction with Armand and Lestat, and in the book we do. Like he appears. So
yeah, it's a very in the interview with the vampire, when Lestat finally shows up at the Theater of Vampires, how he knows Armand, their background, their history, and everything is never really clarified. He just kind of shows up. He's there. I do remember getting the sense that Lestat was definitely not comfortable being there in trying to negotiate for Louis to come back with him. That Armand had some kind of authority over him, or he had some fear of Armand and everything else. So there was a whole lot that was, as far as I can recall, left unsaid about the past relationship between Lestat, the theater, and Armand.
But now we know.
Well, a version of it at least, because the question is, if the Theater of Vampires has been founded in this version by Nicholas and the 3 survivors, are we still going to arrive at a point where Armand takes over the theater? Because it seems to me that would be going way backwards for, unless he destroys all the members of the theater here and starts over with a whole new batch and convinces them otherwise. Because by the time we see the vampires in Interview with the Vampire, they're operating amongst mortals to a certain extent. Santiago's out walking amongst the streets and dressed as a nice man and everything. So I suppose maybe Armand changes his philosophy on how to operate in this world and does a hostile takeover of the theater. That's the only way I can see us arriving at a situation similar to the first book, because right now it doesn't seem like Armand's a very popular guy amongst those he's been effectively lying to for God knows how long.
Yeah, I think that's what's going to happen. And that's how we're going to get the link from the past book to this one.
Yeah.
And I understand now perfectly why it didn't make sense to put it in the movie. Like,
Oh,
if,
yes.
you know,
Yeah,
because it doesn't happen. The movie doesn't happen. So when we read the book, it was like, huh. I mean, it didn't make sense, like you said. And now, in the next book, we have at least, half of the answer.
yes. Yeah,
So
this is if now that we know Lestat's history with not only the theater but Paris and these other characters, as soon as he figures out that Louis and Claudia went to Paris, he'd know exactly the first place to look if you're going to look for vampires in Paris. And so, of course, he goes to the theater, and so yeah, we might still all arrive at the same spot as we did in Interview with the Vampire, and Lestat might be uncomfortable in the scene we saw in Interview with the Vampire for reasons we have yet to effectively learn about in here. But yeah, I wonder if we'll get like Santiago's origin at some point, if he even exists. Because here's the thing is that since we know Interview with the Vampire exists as a book in this universe, everything that we know about the characters and events from that book are a giant question mark as to how accurate or relevant that they are now that we're in the quote unquote real continuity and real universe as told by Lestat. So,
yes.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. But yeah, if they'd put Lestat showing up at the Theater of Vampires in the movie, it would have shown that he survived all their attempts to kill him. And then it would have been like, how did you get here? Why are you here? It would have made as much sense as Lestat showing up in San Francisco after having been ravished and left for dead in New Orleans in a state that he can't interact with the modern world. I really would love to know, and I know this is off topic, I would really love to know what was the thinking when Anne Rice or whoever else was writing the script for the movie, where they set the interview itself in San Francisco on the opposite side of the country where Lestat actually was. Why not set it in New Orleans? It just makes so much more sense to set it in New Orleans. You cut down on all of the geography of it, of the sense of Lestat showing up when he did. If I have one question I'd love to have answered, and I'm sure maybe somebody already has or has asked her that question, why set the movie, or at least the bookending events, in San Francisco of all places? It just doesn't track. Just doesn't track. But anyway, I think we'll wrap things up there. So for next week, we have The Vampire Armand, Part 5.
Yes.
Of The Vampire Lestat, and it goes on for, let me check here, just because I don't know, 269.
It's almost as long as this one, and I think we should just read one, because another thing that I was going to say, like, remember that you were thinking of reading like 2 chapters for this week.
Oh yeah, no, just do the
and
one.
it was full, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
Even though it wasn't like too many pages, it was like packed with things.
Yeah.
So I think this one is gonna be 2.
Yeah, just do the one section, and I've got a really busy week for different things coming up anyway, so just doing the one. So Part 5, The Vampire Armand, for next week, and that'll be next Sunday at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, for the next part of Book Review of The Vampire Lestat. If you guys have any comments, questions, or otherwise about the book, or your own observations about what's going on, if we missed anything or jumbled something up, because God knows we probably did, please leave a comment. If you like this kind of thing, leave a like on the way out if you would. If you don't like this kind of thing, well, you can leave a dislike if you want, or just say nothing at all. That's always polite. Outside of that, programming note for the channel, at least, as always, Thursday, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, will be another TED Excellence. I'll take a look at an off-brand TED Talk for fun and education. I call it Funication. Not fornication, Funication. I want to get that straight. Anybody else gets mixed up. Anyway, Leonora, thank you for joining me as always.
Thank you.
Everyone, moderators specifically, thank you so much for keeping an eye on things, even though everyone here is so well behaved. You have very, very little to do. Everybody who donated, either to myself or to the fundraisers at the top of the chat box, thank you guys so much for your generosity. Really do appreciate it. Hope you all have a good rest of your Sunday, rest of your weekend, a good week ahead of you. I hope you're all safe and well. If you're not well, please get well soon, and we will see you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.